I wasn't supposed to notice her the way I did. It started on one of those nights when the office felt too quiet, the hum of the old ceiling lights louder than my thoughts. Everyone had gone home hours ago, but I stayed behind, pretending to finish a report I could have wrapped up in 20 minutes. Truth was, I wasn't working late for the job. I was working late for her. Her name was Clara. My boss's daughter. She was older, late 40s maybe, but not in a way that dulled her. There was a sharpness in her eyes, the kind of gaze that could make a man forget what he was saying. She'd started helping out in the office a few weeks ago, filling in while her father traveled. Technically, she wasn't my boss, but the title hung over her like a shadow anyway. It made everything between us feel like forbidden ground. That night, I heard the faint squeak of her heels in the hallway before I saw her. I straightened in my chair, shuffling papers I hadn't read. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her silhouette softened by the warm office lamp. "You're always working late," she said, half amused, half curious. I should have laughed it off. Should have said something safe. But the words slipped out before I could stop them. "Maybe I'm waiting for you." The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Her lips parted just slightly, like she wanted to answer, but didn't. She stepped inside, the faint scent of her perfume cutting through the stale air of photocopier ink and coffee. "You shouldn't say things like that," she said finally. But her voice wasn't stern. It was soft. Careful. I shrugged, forcing a smile I didn't really feel. "Maybe I shouldn't stay this late either." She lowered her eyes, moving closer to my desk. The way she rested her hand on the edge, steady but tentative, made me wonder if she even realized how close her fingers were to mine. If I shifted just an inch, I could have brushed them. I didn't. Not yet. Her presence changed the room. The hum of the lights seemed quieter, the air heavier. I found myself watching small things. The way she smoothed her sleeve when she wasn't sure what to say, how her breathing caught just slightly when I held her gaze too long. "You're too young to waste nights like this," she said. "You should be out, living." I almost laughed. "Maybe this is how I want to live." Her eyes lifted to mine then, sharp and searching. And for a flicker of a second, I thought she saw through me, past the playful tone, past the casual words, straight into the hunger I was trying to bury. The sound of a car horn outside shattered the moment, and she pulled back just enough to break the invisible thread between us. She straightened, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "I should lock up," she murmured. I nodded, pretending to turn back to my papers, though my hands weren't steady anymore. As she moved toward the door, she hesitated. Just for a second. Her hand brushed the frame, and then, slowly, like it wasn't an accident, her eyes found mine again. It wasn't a smile. It wasn't an invitation. But it wasn't nothing either. And that look, quiet, unfinished, was the beginning of everything. I told myself it was harmless. Just words. Just a look. But when she left the office that night, her absence stayed heavier than her presence. The next evening, I caught myself staring at the door, waiting for her to appear again. And she did. Almost like she knew I'd still be there. She leaned against the same doorway, same crossed arms, but tonight her hair was loose, falling over her shoulders instead of tied back. She looked less like a supervisor and more like someone tired of carrying something alone. "You're here again," she said, almost smiling. I could say the same. Her laugh was soft, but it didn't last. She stepped inside, shutting the door behind her this time. That small detail hit harder than I expected. "I'm only here because my father asked me to keep things running while he's gone." Her hand brushed over the desk as she spoke, not meeting my eyes. "Truth is, I hate this place." Too many memories. She didn't explain, but she didn't have to. I could hear the weariness in her tone, the kind that doesn't come from work. I studied her the way I shouldn't have, noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the way she pressed her lips together, as if holding something back. She wasn't untouchable the way I'd imagined. She was human. Fragile, even. You don't seem like someone who hates being here, I said. That earned me her gaze again. Her eyes lingered on me a second too long before drifting away. Maybe that's because I don't mind the company. The words landed in my chest harder than they should have. I shifted in my chair, gripping the edge like I needed to ground myself. She couldn't have meant it the way it sounded. But then again, maybe she did. I just got out of something messy, she admitted, almost to herself. A divorce, if we're calling it what it is. And sometimes I wonder if I wasted too much of my life already. Her vulnerability sat between us like a fragile glass. I didn't know if I was supposed to touch it or pretend it wasn't there. I don't think it's wasted, I said quietly. She tilted her head, studying me like she wasn't sure whether to believe it. My throat tightened under her silence, and for the first time, I wished I could read her the way she seemed to read me. When she finally moved closer, the shift in distance felt like a secret. Her hand rested lightly on the desk near mine, and then, without quite looking at me, she brushed her fingers across my sleeve. Barely there, but enough to stop my breath. You don't have to stay this late, she murmured. I swallowed. Maybe I want to. Her lips curved, just slightly, but her eyes gave her away. There was conflict there, the same kind burning through me. She let her fingers linger a moment longer on my arm. Then stay. I kept telling myself I was imagining it. That her words, her touch, were nothing more than kindness, or loneliness dressed up as something else. But the next night, when she appeared again, I knew I was lying to myself. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, setting one beside my papers without asking. Thought you could use it, she said. Her tone was casual, but her hand lingered a moment too long on the handle before she let go. I wrapped my fingers around the mug just to feel the warmth she'd left behind. Thanks, I muttered, careful not to let my voice betray me. We worked side by side in silence for a while. I wasn't reading the report in front of me. I was counting the seconds between her breaths, memorizing the soft rustle of her sleeve when she shifted in her chair. At some point, she leaned over to look at a chart I was pretending to study. Her shoulder brushed mine. Not hard, not obvious, just enough to send a current through me. I froze, but I didn't move away. Neither did she. You always take things so seriously, she whispered, her face closer than it should have been. I turned my head before I could stop myself. For one dangerous moment, we were only inches apart. If either of us leaned forward, even slightly. Her phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the spell. The sound made her flinch, and she pulled back quickly, fumbling to answer. Hello? Her voice softened, but there was tension under it. I looked away, staring hard at the papers as though they'd anchor me. I shouldn't have been jealous of whoever was on the other end, but I was. She hung up after a few clipped words, setting the phone face down. Her jaw was tight, eyes avoiding mine. Everything okay? I asked, my voice low. Just my father. He wanted to know if I'd finished something. She exhaled sharply, then shook her head. I hate how he still checks on me like I'm a child. There it was again, that crack in her armor, the part of her she didn't show anyone else. It pulled me closer even when I knew I should step back. You don't seem like a child to me, I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes flicked to mine. Something heavy, unspoken, filled the space between us. My pulse thudded in my ears, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to stop from reaching for her. she noticed. I could tell she did, because her hand drifted toward mine again, hesitated, then stopped just short. The silence was unbearable. My heart was in my throat, every nerve screaming to close the distance. But my head was louder, reminding me how wrong this was. How dangerous. And then she whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "Do you want this to stop?" Her question hung in the air. Do you want this to stop? I didn't answer right away. Couldn't. My throat was dry, my chest tight, and for the first time since this began, I felt how close I was to stepping over a line I couldn't step back from. She didn't move. Her hand was still near mine, her eyes searching, almost staring me to say something real. "I don't know if I can stop," I whispered finally. The admission stunned even me. I expected her to recoil, to pull away and shut the door on whatever this was. But instead, her lips trembled like she was holding back words of her own. "You shouldn't say things like that," she murmured, echoing what she told me that first night. Only now her voice wasn't careful, it was unsteady, almost breaking. "Then tell me you don't feel it too," I said. My words were sharper than I meant them to be, but the silence between us had become unbearable. Her eyes flashed, and for a second, I thought she might. But she didn't. Instead, she laughed softly, though it wasn't really a laugh. It was brittle, strained. "You're too young," she said. "Too young to know what you want. And I'm too old to pretend I don't." The honesty hit like a spark against dry wood. I leaned back in my chair, trying to breathe evenly, but my hands were shaking. "You think I don't know what I want?" My voice was low, but it carried. "Clara, I've never been more sure of anything." Her face tightened at the sound of her name on my lips. She closed her eyes for a moment, like she needed strength to keep standing there. When she opened them again, the look she gave me wasn't guarded anymore. It was raw, unmasked. "You don't understand what it would mean if I—" She stopped herself, biting down on the rest. Her hand rose slightly, then dropped, as if she'd thought about touching me and lost the nerve at the last second. The silence that followed was so thick I could feel my heartbeat echoing against it. "Then explain it," I pressed, softer this time. "Because all I see is you here with me. And I can't pretend it's nothing." Her breath caught. Her eyes darted toward the door, then back to me, like she was trapped between leaving and staying. Finally, she whispered, "If I let this happen, I don't know if I'll forgive myself." I leaned forward, my voice trembling. "And if you don't?" Her eyes locked onto mine. For a long, unbearable moment, neither of us moved. The air felt electric, fragile. Then, in the quiet, she asked the one question that shattered me. "Would you forgive me if I did?" Her question still echoed in my head. Would you forgive me if I did? I opened my mouth, searching for words that didn't sound desperate, when a sharp knock on the office door jolted us both. Clara jumped, pulling her hand back like she'd been burned. "Clara? You in there?" a voice called. It was the janitor. He rattled the handle once before moving on down the hall, whistling as he pushed his cart. The sound faded, but the damage was done. Clara's shoulders slumped as if the interruption had snapped whatever thread we'd been clinging to. She turned away from me, hand pressed to her temple. "This is wrong," she whispered. I stood, unable to stay seated anymore. "Why does it feel more right than anything else?" She faced me then, her eyes glistening. And for the first time, she didn't look like my boss's daughter. She looked like someone who'd been fighting a war inside herself for too long. "You don't know me," she said, her voice trembling. "Not really." I took a step closer, my chest tightening. "Then tell me. Tell me what I don't know." She hesitated, as if weighing whether the truth would destroy what little balance we had left. Then, finally, she spoke. "I saw you before any of this," she said. My brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Her eyes softened, distant. "Months ago. At the cafe across from the library. You were sitting alone, reading. You looked lost. And I remember thinking, he doesn't know how much he's worth yet." She shook her head, almost laughing at herself. "I noticed you before you ever noticed me." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I told myself this had all been in my head, that I was the one chasing something impossible. But hearing her admit she'd seen me, thought of me, long before our first words, it changed everything. "You watched me?" I asked quietly, not an accusation but all. Her lips pressed together. "I shouldn't have. But you reminded me of someone I used to know. Someone I couldn't save." Her confession cut deeper than I expected. She wasn't just drawn to me, she was haunted by something in her past. I wanted to ask who, but the look on her face stopped me. It was grief, raw and unresolved. "I thought I could ignore it," she said, voice breaking. "That if I stayed busy, if I buried myself in work, it would fade. But then you walked in here, and you couldn't." I finished for her. Our eyes locked, the weight of her admission pressing down on both of us. My pulse hammered, torn between wanting to hold her and wanting to run from how much this now meant. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then, in the silence, she whispered the one thing I wasn't ready for. "I don't think this is about choice anymore." Her words, "I don't think this is about choice anymore," sat heavy between us. I could feel it in the stillness of the room, in the way her breathing quickened, in the way my own hands trembled against my sides. I stepped closer. Not too close, but enough that I could see the faint lines by her eyes, the small tremor of her lips as she tried not to say what she was feeling. "You don't have to hide from me," I said softly. "Not anymore." She shook her head, a bitter laugh slipping out. "You make it sound simple. But it isn't. I'm older, I'm your boss's daughter, I'm Clara." I said her name firmly, and it stopped her. "None of that changes the way I—" My voice cracked before I could finish. I swallowed hard. "The way I need you." Her eyes filled before she could blink them back. For the first time, she didn't try to mask it, didn't hide behind careful words. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Of me? Of what I'll want if I let this happen." Something in me broke then, the restraint, the excuses, the waiting. I lifted my hand slowly, giving her time to step back. She didn't. When my fingers brushed her cheek, her breath caught. "I already want it," I admitted. "And I don't think I can pretend otherwise." For a long, fragile moment, she searched my face, as though waiting to find some reason to pull away. But instead, she leaned into my touch, just slightly, like surrendering a battle she'd been fighting too long. And then she kissed me. It wasn't perfect, not at first. It was hesitant, trembling, full of all the things we hadn't said. But the second I kissed her back, the hesitation vanished. Months of silence, longing, and fear poured out in one desperate, unguarded moment. When we finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead to mine, eyes closed. Her hands were clutching my shirt like she needed proof I was real. "This can't be casual," she said, breathless. "Not for me." "It isn't," I answered instantly. My voice shook, but I meant it. It never was. The weight of what we'd done hit us both then, but neither of us moved away. If anything, the closeness felt more honest than anything else ever had. Her fingers brushed my jaw, softer now. "Then promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. Don't make me regret this." The plea in her voice was raw, stripped of all her defenses. And though I didn't know how the world outside this office would change us, I knew in that moment I would rather carry the weight of that promise than ever let her feel alone again. "I won't," I whispered back. And when she kissed me a second time, slower, deeper, it felt less like a risk, and more like the truth we had been circling all along. The office felt different after that night. Not because the walls had changed, or the flickering ceiling light had fixed itself. It was us. We weren't circling anymore. We'd stepped into something we could never unstep from. For a while neither of us spoke. We just stayed close, her hand still resting against my chest, my thumb brushing over her knuckles like I was afraid she'd disappear if I stopped. Finally, she broke the silence. "Do you realize what this means?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "It means I don't have to pretend anymore." Her laugh was soft, unsteady. "You make it sound easy." "It won't be easy," I admitted. "But does that mean it isn't worth it?" She looked at me then, really looked. And I think she saw the truth in my face, the rawness, the youth, the absolute certainty I felt about her. Slowly, her shoulders relaxed. The regret I'd seen in her eyes before seemed to loosen its grip. For the first time, she didn't look like someone torn between right and wrong. She looked like a woman who had finally allowed herself to want. "I've spent so many years worrying about mistakes," she whispered. "And now, with you, it feels like maybe I don't have to anymore." That was the change I hadn't expected, not just in her, but in me. She'd carried regret like armor, and I'd carried uncertainty like a shadow. But somewhere in the middle, we'd given each other something else, the permission to feel alive. We stayed until the clock struck midnight, not rushing, not hiding. When we finally left, walking side by side through the quiet parking lot, the air between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady. At her car, she paused, keys in her hand. "So what happens now?" I smiled, not with bravado, but with something softer. "Now we find out together." Her lips curved, not in fear, not in hesitation, but in the kind of smile you give when you're ready to stop running from yourself. She slipped her fingers into mine, and for the first time, either of us pulled away. Looking back, I think the story isn't about age or titles or the rules we almost broke. It's about what happens when two people see each other, truly see each other, at a moment when they least expect it. She taught me that regret doesn't have to define you. I gave her a reason to believe it wasn't too late. Together, we stepped into something messy, fragile, and real. And maybe that's all love ever is. So if you've listened this far, I want to ask you, did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?